A very warm welcome everyone. Today in this class of Science and Technology, we will be starting a new chapter, Unit 2, Classification of Living Beings for Class 10. So, as we all know that there are so many living organisms around us, and many years ago scientists they tried to study each and every organisms individually, and at that point of time it was quite feasible because only little number of organisms were discovered. But later, when more and more organisms were discovered throughout the world, then scientists they struggled to study all of those organisms individually. So they decided to classify those organisms into groups so that when they can study about a certain group, they can study about the characteristics of all the organism that lies within the group. So after hearing all this, can you guys define the term classification of living beings? Yes, classification of living being is the process of dividing the organisms into groups, not only according to their similarities, but also we should consider the dissimilarities between the organisms. So, the process of dividing living organisms into groups according to their similar characteristics as well as dissimilar characteristics is called as classification of living beings. Having said that, can you guys guess who is the father of taxonomy? You have studied this in grade 9. Yes, it's Carlos Linnaeus because he was the first scientist who tried to classify organisms into kingdoms, and he is famous for his two kingdom system classification, animal kingdom and plant kingdom. But not only that, Carlos Linnaeus also developed the binomial system of nomenclature. So what is binomial system of nomenclature? Let us try to understand from this sentence itself. So bi means two, nominal comes from the root word nomen, which means name, and nomens mean name, and clature comes from the root word clare, which means to call. So from this we can say that binomial system of nomenclature, it is the biological system of assigning two names, the genus and the species, to an organism is called as binomial system of nomenclature. So any organism is given two names. The first name is called as the genus, which represents the organisms that is closely related with each other, and they cannot interbreed within each other to produce fertile offspring. And the second name is the species, and species are those organisms that are very identical, that is they have same characteristics and they can interbreed to form a fertile offspring. So binomial system of nomenclature gives an organism two names, the genus and the species, collectively known as the scientific name of that organisms. So the maize plant is also known as Z maize. Z means the genus and maize means the species. Similarly, cat, the scientific name of cat is Felis catus. The dog is Canis familiaris, and us human beings have the scientific name Homo sapiens. Now from this, you can understand a certain rules about assigning the name to any organism. The genus must always have a capital letter, but the species name should not start with a capital letter. The genus and the species, in between those two names, there should always be a space. And when you are writing this name in a computer, then you can make it italics. But when you are writing in a paper, you must underline the name. But you should not underline both the name with one single line. But you should underline genus separately and species separately. So those are the few rules that you must remember about how to assign a scientific name to a certain organism. So let me ask you guys another question. So can you guys guess why classification of living beings was so necessary? I've already mentioned one point before, and can you guys guess the remaining 3 points as well? Okay, I hope you mentioned all these 4 points. The first point is that I already mentioned previously, scientists were having difficulties in studying about the organism. So they classified the organism into group so they can study about the collective number of organism in group, so that they can study about the group and they can know all the characteristics of all the organism present in the group, making the study of organism easier. The second reason why classification was needed is to assign scientific name. When classification was done, it was very easy to assign scientific name because genus represents the species that are very close, the group of organisms that are very close to each other, but not completely identical. So it was quite easy to assign the scientific name to organisms when you could classify it and understand which organism is closer to which organism. So the another reason is it was very easy to assign scientific name due to classification. The third point is it shows phylogenetic relationship. Now, phylogenetic relationship means evolutionary relationship, how that organism evolved throughout the time, or how a certain organism evolved throughout the time. So, classification clearly shows the evolution throughout the time. How from a single cell we became multicellular cell, and from multicellular cell we became more complex and complex and complex to form an organism that we are now. So classification also helps us understand the origin of an organism as well as their evolutionary history as well as evolutionary relationship between the two organisms. So the third reason why classification was needed is it shows phylogenetic relationship between the organisms. Now the last point that I will mention for why classification is needed would be for the correct identification of organism. So suppose we find a new species, and the first thing we have to do is we have to identify what the new species is. So we look at all the classification and each group of organisms characteristics and try to identify which characteristics is identical to the new species we found. So classification helps us to correctly identify any new organism that we discover. So these are the 4 main reasons why classification is needed. Now let us study about next topic, that is the hierarchy of classification. Now there is a certain order in which the organisms is arranged in successive level in a biological classification, and that successive level or order is called as the hierarchy of classification. And the at the topmost hierarchy there lies the kingdom. The kingdom composes of large number of organisms, and then we have the division or the phylum. If it is a plant, then we will call it a division, and if it is an animal, we call it a phylum. So then after kingdom there comes division and phylum. After kingdom we have the kingdom is divided into either division or phylum. So it has a little number of organisms because it starts to get segregated. Then we have the class, order, family, genus, then finally species. Now kingdom consists of large number of organisms and specific species, and among those kingdom specific organism that belong to a single species, the number is very less compared to the entire kingdom. So that's why we have an inverted pyramidal shape. Now it will be very difficult to remember the hierarchy in order. So there's a mnemonics that might help you guys, because it definitely helped me during my school days. So the mnemonic is keep pot clean, otherwise family gets sick. So K, keep means kingdom, pot P for phylum or division, clean C class, otherwise O gives order, family gets G gives us genus, and sick means species. So keep pot clean, otherwise family gets sick means kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. So this is the specific order for the biological classification, that is the hierarchy of classification. Now let us try to classify this guy, who is a human being. So a human being, they lie in the kingdom Animalia. So what is the phylum they lie in? Can you guys guess? So we are the chordates. So we lie in the phylum Chordata. We lie in the class Mammalia because human beings are mammals. Then the order is primates, family Hominidae. And what is the scientific name of human beings? Yes, it's Homo sapiens. So Homo is genus and sapiens is species. So Homo sapiens is the scientific name of human being. In class 9, we already studied about 5 kingdom system classification that was given by Robert Whittaker in 1969. So keeping that 5 kingdom system classification in mind, can you guys guess all the organisms that I'm going to show you now, which kingdom they actually lie in? So the first organism I have here is this. So can you guys guess which kingdom or which organism this is and which kingdom they lie in? Yes, it's a bacteria, so it lies in the kingdom Monera. Now we have a sunflower. So what kingdom does sunflower lie in? It's very easy. Yes, it belongs to the kingdom Plantae. Now we have another organism. It's a mushroom. So can you guys guess which kingdom mushroom lies in? Yes, it lies in kingdom Fungi. Now we have Hydra. Now can you guys guess what kingdom Hydra lies in? I hope you guys said kingdom Animalia because you should not be confused by the color and the shape of this organism. It is not a plant, it is an animal. So Hydra is an animal. Just because the diagram is green in color does not mean it is a plant. So Hydra belongs in the kingdom Animalia. Now I have the final organism. So what organism is this? Yes, it's Paramecium. And what kingdom does it lie in? Yes, it lies in the kingdom Protista. Now, I hope you guys guessed, and if you did not guess it correctly, I'll be covering all of this again. So you should not be worried about that. So let us try to classify organism into 5 kingdom system and how that classification was done. So first of all, an organism was divided into 5 kingdom system classification, keeping some of the characteristics in mind. The first thing that was kept in mind is the structure of cell. That is, if a cell is a prokaryotic cell or an eukaryotic cell. So can you guys tell me what is a prokaryotic cell? Yes, prokaryotes is the organism that does not contains a nucleus. That is, there is no nuclear envelope to cover the genetic material and nucleolus. So prokaryotic cell does not have nucleus, and not only that, it does not possess certain cell organelles that are double membrane like endoplasmic reticulum or Golgi apparatus, etc. So any cell that does not have nucleus or membrane bound organelle, then they are the prokaryotes. So can you guys tell me what is a eukaryotic cell? How can you distinguish a eukaryotic cell from a prokaryotic cell? Yes, eukaryotic cell has a nuclear envelope, so it has a distinct nucleus. And not only that, it also has cell organelles that are double membrane bound. The Golgi apparatus, the endoplasmic reticulums, all of them are present in the eukaryotic cell. So that is the major difference. So keeping that in mind, the organisms are divided into 2 categories, the prokaryotes and the eukaryotes. Now, after that, another point was kept in mind, the complexity of the body. That is, if the body is unicellular or multicellular. So, prokaryotes were unicellular, and all the prokaryotic unicellular cell at that lied the monera. kingdom Monera. So all the organisms that was prokaryotic and were unicellular, they belonged to the kingdom Monera. Similarly, eukaryotes were divided into two categories again, if the cell is whether the cell is unicellular or multicellular. Now all the unicellular eukaryotes were kept in the kingdom Protista. Now there comes the multicellular organism, and after this the presence and absence of cell wall in the cell was taken into consideration. So if there was no cell wall in the multicellular eukaryotic cell, then they were placed in the kingdom Animalia. Now after cell wall, so a certain plant, if they have cell wall, then after that their mode of nutrition was considered. So if it is an autotroph or a heterotroph. So after that, heterotrophic organism that has cell wall and are multicellular were kept in the kingdom Fungi, whereas the autotrophic organism that had cell wall and were multicellular were kept in the kingdom Plantae. So this is how 5 kingdom system classification was done. So Monera were the organisms that were unicellular and were prokaryotic. Protista, unicellular eukaryotes. Animalia, multicellular eukaryotes that did not have cell wall. Plantae, autotrophic multicellular eukaryotes that had cell wall. And fungi were the heterotrophic multicellular eukaryotes that had cell wall. Now let us study about the basic characteristics of all of this kingdom. So the first kingdom we have is Monera, and as I mentioned earlier, they are the prokaryotic unicellular organisms. And the mode of nutrition in Monera is both, or either they are autotrophs or heterotrophs. Now autotrophs are those organisms that can prepare their own food, whereas the heterotrophs are organisms that cannot prepare their own food. And in heterotroph there lies 3 different modes of nutrition: the holozoic mode of nutrition, the parasitic mode of nutrition, and the saprophytic mode of nutrition. In the holozoic mode of nutrition, the organism, they take in food and they ingest in food and they take in nutrition through the food they ingested, such as us human beings. And the other is parasitic mode of nutrition. So the organism that absorbs nutrients from other living beings, then they are also called as parasitic organisms. And did you guys know that human embryos are also parasitic in nature, because the embryo, they absorb nutrients from the mother's body. So the human embryo also has parasitic mode of nutrients. And the final mode of heterotrophic nutrition is the saprophytic mode of nutrients. In that mode of nutrition, the organism, they absorb the nutrients from dead and decaying living bodies. So you should keep in mind these 3 modes of heterotrophic nutrition. Now let us move on to the second kingdom, that is Protista. Protista contains organisms that are eukaryotic and they are mostly unicellular. And the mode of nutrition of the organism present in this kingdom is both either autotrophs or heterotrophs. The other kingdom is fungi. Now fungi is also an eukaryotic organism. They are mostly multicellular and they do not have chlorophyll in them. So they cannot be autotroph, that is, they cannot prepare their own food. So the mode of nutrition of the organism in this kingdom is saprophytic. That means they absorb the nutrients from dead and decaying bodies of the organism. Now another kingdom is Plantae. Now in this kingdom there lies the organism which are eukaryotic, multicellular, and the main distinguishing features is autotroph. So all the organisms that are autotrophs, multicellular and eukaryotic, they belong to the kingdom Plantae. and the cell wall of the organism present in this kingdom is composed of cellulose. Now there comes another kingdom, that is Animalia, in which we all belong to. So the basic characteristics of the organism present in this kingdom is they are eukaryotic, multicellular, heterotrophs, and their cell wall is absent. Now we already studied about Monera, Protista and fungi in the grade 9. So in grade 10 we will study about the kingdom Plantae and kingdom Animalia in detail. Let us start by studying about the plant kingdom. Now looking at this diagram of all the plants that I've shown here, can you guys tell me a few identical characteristics among all these organisms? Yes, all of them are green in color due to the presence of chlorophyll. So, due to the presence of chlorophyll, they can prepare their own food. That means they are autotrophs. Can you guys mention any dissimilarities among all of these organisms? Yes, you can see that there are certain plants that bear fruits, but certain plants that does not bear fruits. Some of them has flowers in them, whereas the others do not have. So keeping all of these features, the similarities as well as dissimilarities in mind, now this plant kingdom is divided into 3 divisions: algae, bryophytes and tracheophytes. Now let us start with the first division, that is the algae. Now you have seen algae all around you. In the pond, you can see that all the pond, rivers and lakes, especially the water that does not flow, it is covered with this green layer, that is algae. Not only that, all those damp and moist area also have algae on them, and if you walk on them, it's quite slippery and you might even fall down. So when you take that, scoop out that algae and then you mix it with a little bit of water and place it in the cover slide and you look it through the microscope, you can see this type of structure. So looking at this structure, can you guys guess a few of the characteristics that this division might have? Okay, you can see that all of these are green in color, so they have chlorophyll pigment in them, so they are autotrophs. Not only that, you can see that some of them are unicellular, whereas some of them are multicellular. You can see all this filamental algae, they are multicellular. So algae, they can be either unicellular, some of them are unicellular, but most of them are multicellular. They are autotrophs and they are eukaryotic cell. You can see some cell organelles as well, but you cannot see here properly. But if you look very closely, you can see some cell organelles as well. So keeping all this in mind, let us try to study about a few characteristics of algae. Now, habitat. So algae are mostly aquatic. So they either lie in fresh water or marine water. So fresh water is that type of water that does not have salt content, high amount of salt content in them, whereas marine waters are those kind of water like oceans that have salt content in them. So you should know this difference. And algae is found in both type of aquatic lifestyle, the fresh water also as well as marine water. And some of them are also terrestrial, which are found in moist places. As you can see here, this bathroom was not cleaned properly, so due to this dampness, you can see some algae growth around here as well. So most of the algae are aquatic, but some of them are also terrestrial that can grow in moist places. Now let us study about the cell structure. Now the structure of the algal cell is eukaryotic, means it has a nucleus and membrane bound cell organelles. So it can be unicellular like Chlamydomonas, or it can also be multicellular like Spirogyra. their cell wall is made up of cellulose. So algae has a cell wall, and the cell wall is mostly composed of cellulose. Another characteristic is nutrition. Now you can see here all of these contains chlorophyll in them, so they can prepare their own food in presence of sunlight, so they are autotrophic. So the food they make, they store it in the form of starch inside the cell. Now the organization of their body is very simple. That is that it does not have any true root, stems or leaf. So that type of body that does not have true root, stem or leaf is known as thallus. So the body of algae is also called as thallus because it does not have true root, stem or leaves. Now, another important characteristics of algae is the reproductive characteristics. Now, algae reproduce by both method of reproduction, asexual method as well as sexual method. Now, in asexual method of reproduction, they reproduce by vegetative propagation. Vegetative propagation such as self-fission. Suppose this is an algae diatom. It divides itself by fission and gives us two daughter cells. Only mitosis, cell division, has occurred during the process of cell fission. That's why the genetic material in these daughter cells are completely identical to the parent cell. So, the organism that we get after the cell fission of this algae is completely identical to the parent cell due to absence of meiosis. In this way, an algae can also reproduce asexually. And not only that, there is another mode of vegetative reproduction as well, that is fragmentation. And in fragmentation in Spirogyra, suppose this is Spirogyra, it has spiral. Now this, it fragments to give two daughter Spirogyra, and each of this fragmented piece will give rise to a new organism. So, fragmentation is also another mode of asexual reproduction in the organism that belongs to the division algae. There is another mode of asexual reproduction as well, that is budding. So, suppose you have this organism, it gets this lateral bud. This is the parent cell or parent organism. Now this lateral bud, it grows and later it just detaches itself from the parent body. Then it forms a new organism. Now this is also another mode of asexual reproduction that might occur in the organism that belongs to the division algae. The final type of asexual reproduction that we'll be studying about is the spore formation. As you can see here in the diagram, the parent cell, also called as zoosporangium, has many spores inside them, and they release the spores outside into the external environment. And as soon as they reach the external environment, they cover itself with this protective shell, and this protective shell, they protects the spore from all the harsh environment around them, and as soon as the spore reaches a favorable condition, they give rise to a new plant. Now let us move on to another type of reproduction, that is the sexual reproduction. Now sexual reproduction in algae, they occur by the fusion of gametes by the process of conjugation, as you can see here in this figure. This figure shows Spirogyra, and two filaments, a male filament and a female filament of Spirogyra, they come very close to each other laterally, and there is the formation of conjugation tube between them, forming a ladder like structure. And after this, the formation of conjugation tube, all the material, genetic material in the male filament, it condenses and then it transfers through this conjugation tube into the female filament and then forming a zygote. So this is another type of example of sexual reproduction that occurs in algae. So few examples of the organism that belong to the division algae is Chlamydomonas, which is a unicellular algae, Volvox, which is a colonial algae. Then we have Spirogyra, Laminaria, they are the multicellular algae. We also have Eulothrix. Now we already studied a lot in this chapter, so let us try to solve this one question from everything that I taught to you guys until now. So the question is, the smallest taxon of classification is, the first option is kingdom, family, phylum and species. So which is the smallest taxon of classification? Yes, it's the species, because in the hierarchy of classification, kingdom was on the top and it was the largest taxon that encompasses large number of organism in it. And then at the bottom of the pyramid was the species, and it was the smallest taxon that encompasses little number of organisms in it. So the correct answer is species. So in this class, we studied, we revised about certain things you studied in grade 9. We studied about why classification was needed, the hierarchy of classification. We also studied about binomial system of classification. And we also talked about 5 different kingdoms of classification and its basic characteristics. We also started studying about the plant kingdom, and we studied about the division algae in this class. So we will cover the remaining topic in the next class. So I'll see you guys in the next class.